Thank you so much, Chloe, for the wonderful introduction. As per the housekeeping, I don't have much more to say or to add. I will now introduce David, and then we're going to start with his talk. And then we'll open up the discussion. We'll ask some questions. And as Chloe said, if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to use the chat option to share them, and then we'll try to answer as many as possible. So we are joined here today by David. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here. We're really very excited. So about David, David Benqué is a designer and researcher living in Cork, Ireland. He holds a PhD from the Royal College of Art in London, where he research focused his research focused on diagrams as a language to engage critically with algorithmic prediction. He continues this practice-led research independently as Institute of Diagram Studies. Today, we're very excited to have him join us for a short talk and discussion on the topic of understanding AI through the politic of divination. And so, without further ado, David, the floor is yours, and we're very, very excited to listen to your talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalia, and thank you everyone at AI Design for the invitation and for putting together these events. Very grateful to be here and sharing some of my thinking with you. I'd like to preface with two quick points. So the first, if I can get my slides going, yeah. So the first is that I don't really believe in AI. So I think the term artificial intelligence already launders a lot of things that we should be very careful of. So I try and avoid using it. When I really cannot, because I do think it's important sometimes to refer to it. So I try to say so-called AI, and then otherwise I talk about algorithmic prediction or algorithmic systems or machine learning, or try to adjust these things that are not completely interchangeable. But yeah, I try to not use AI just out of the can, let's say. And the second point that I would like to quickly touch on before starting is that I feel just so privileged and grateful to be able to discuss AI in esoteric terms today and to be able to research this while I'm very acutely aware that some populations right now are under very intense and direct suffering as the result of AI or so-called AI systems. So I'm speaking, of course, of the situation in Israel, Palestine. And if you haven't kind of read up on the role of AI in this atrocious war, then I encourage you to read the articles on the systems called Gospel and Lavender and all the kind of journalism. And Project Nimbus, of course, as it's suggested in the chat. So just wanted a quick mention of this. That I'm feeling really grateful that we're able to go to such a high level analysis and talk about esoteric things, while there is absolutely brutal suffering unfolding. So with this being said, as Natalia introduced, I'm talking today in my capacity as the Institute of Diagram Studies, which is an independent research, practice-led research kind of entity that I've created for myself as part of continuing some work that I started during my PhD, but also being, kind of incompatible with, a purely kind of academic career for many reasons that I could get into. But so just deciding to go this kind of independent route. So my PhD was during the first lockdown, so 2021, about 4 years ago, about this time of year. So this stuff has been going on for about 4 years right now. So as a whole, the Institute of Diagram Studies and my approach basically boils down to this: is like seeing everything as and through diagram, which is at once like a super constraining demand or manifesto, but also it's very elastic. So it's not just drawing diagrams of everything, but it's thinking diagrammatically in terms of relations and movements and connections and things like this. So it's something that's at once very constraining, but also kind of, fit many different configurations and setups. So some keywords of this practice in general, things that like methodologically and like kind of theoretically frame my work are these three, I guess, main concepts of like one, media archaeology. So an archaeological approach. It's this idea of going into the depths, whether it's like historical or technical, but really kind of also material, even if the material is oftentimes like code in my case. But really kind of grappling with this excavation work and engaging kind of physically with things. The second is this idea of an operative image. So with diagrams, it's important to imagine that or like to be conscious that I'm not talking about visual studies. So I don't really care about the shape of arrows or the color of boxes or stuff like this. It can be important, but it's not really my main concern. My main concern is the kinds of systems and apparatuses that the diagrams depict. So the relationships, the kinds of entanglements, or more globally relations that are depicted in the diagram as an operative image. And thirdly is this idea of vectoral politics. So this comes very much from the work of Mackenzie Wark and the work that started with the Hacker Manifesto. And so this is this view of capitalism that we are now in a vectoral stage capitalism, where the main source of wealth and power are vectors. So data, basically, and the kinds of data that are vectorized, so that are like feeding into algorithmic systems. I won't expand too much on this. We can come back to it if you like, or can check this out in your own time. But yeah, these are basically like three core ideas that drive the Institute's kind of practice and research work that I'm doing. But today we're going to focus on one aspect, which is the kind of divination studies elements. So this is kind of one of three of the main kind of chapters in my PhD research. And so as a formation, or like a kind of diagrammatic form, I would say, the chicane was my way into this broader field of like divination studies, and in particular, using divination as a critical angle into so-called AI or algorithmic prediction system, as a way to open up like kind of more and novel modes of analysis into it. And so to start, I want to start with his positions from scholar Robin James. And she was talking at the time about big data, because that was the keyword in 2015. There wasn't so much talk about, well, there was a little bit of talk about AI, but not as much as now. It was, I guess, more big data oriented. And so in this wonderful piece called Cloudy Logic, James basically dismisses big data as kind of similar to astrology, right? So it's like the core point is that, and she basically revisits Theodore Adorno's critique of astrology and applies it to big data, right? And the point is that both astrology and big data are kind of, ways to launder old stereotypes. And they both present a kind of pseudo rationality. Hello, am I back?
You've always
We
been
can
here.
hear you.
Oh, okay, I had a lost connection screen, so that's why I stopped talking. But self-fulfilling prophecies. Perfect. So yes, James is kind of critical and uses this, algorithms are as bad as astrology argument, which I have to say is quite convincing. Like, there are some very valid points in that piece. And I think, it's an argument that's been made by more people, including artists and designers. I can think of like a few artworks that reproduce kind of like auguries or oracles or things like this using machine learning. But I have to say that this take kind of leaves me wanting for more. Like, I don't think it's complete because it. What then? Like, once we've sent back so-called AI and astrology back to back as like pseudo rationalities, then what? What do we do? So does this imply that there's a kind of real rationality that both are missing, like a baseline kind of truth? Or in that down that road, is this idea that like the only problem with these systems is bias, and that bias can somehow be removed or corrected or whatever. So I'm kind of left feeling unhappy about the conclusion that this piece leaves me at. And so the way out that I found is actually using Joshua Rami's Politics of Divination, which was like, for me, a kind of key text for this chapter in my research. This idea that actually maybe the way out is to take divination seriously, right? As a kind of immutable need for humanity to engage with the unknown or the unpredictable. And so that kind of stays and is a drive that has been there and that will be there kind of as a permanent fixture of our condition. This kind of need to mediate our relationship to chance, but that the analysis should focus on the politics of this relationship instead of whether this divination exists or not. You know what I mean? So the politics of this mediation are the thing that we should focus on, and not whether or not there is a mediation. As so much of this these kinds of arguments, pretend that, or like to pretend that there is direct access to a baseline truth of the world. Like that's one of the core tenets of like the big data era. And so I really recommend Rami's book, because even coming from like a critical data studies angle, it's also like a great literature review of like all these different, modes of prediction and particularly finance. But he like kind of meets all these different scholars and thinkers and ways of looking at finance and data and algorithms through the lens of divination, and that was really super helpful. And so one key kind of formation that emerges from this argument is this form of the chicane, which Rami borrows this from a divination scholar called Jeffrey Cornelius, and it's basically like this really key, like almost the engine of divinatory practice in their view. So it's a chicane means like sharp turn or a trick or a kind of subterfuge. Like something is kind of happening, but in their view, the kind of it's something that is not like tricking somebody, like a kind of a trick that is imposed onto the client, but it's something that a kind of game that both diviner and client kind of partake in together. And even in cases where like things are obviously, I would say, made up, they are made up together in a sense that like this belief is suspended, and divinatory knowledge is produced together, not necessarily in a malicious way, but through this kind of performative ritual, or it depends. It could be applied to many different situations. So the key kind of characteristics that this relies on, according to Cornelius, is this idea of double thinking. So messages with multiple interpretations, even conflicting ones. There are also symbolic kind of props, and it could also include like objects or concepts or ritualistic also element. And then of course it's like this game of interpretation in which both diviner and client are involved in. And so for Rami, it's like the question again is not whether or not there is a chicane, but it's like whether this process, this game, is sincere or not. And so in his argument, he applies this divination kind of scholarship to the neoliberal market. So in Rami's argument, markets are like, kind of pretend to cater to the divinatory impulse, but they kind of subvert it. They kind of, pretend to be divinatory, but really kind of subvert the need to engage with chance for profit reasons, to put it bluntly, or for to increase power of big actors and stuff. And so to dig into this relation is like look at or this question of sincerity of the chicane. We can look at things like, what is the power relation between diviner and client? Is it an equal one, or is one pretending to have knowledge or claiming to have knowledge that the other one doesn't have? That he's the only intermediary to certain knowledge that the client then has to get from them, therefore placing them in a dominant relationship. These kinds of things. What kinds of possibilities, for example, are sustained or which are foreclosed by the particular chicanery that is taking place. So again, for Rami, this is very much a way of showing how the neoliberal market kind of betrays its role as a source of divinatory knowledge. And so for me, this was really key in understanding algorithmic systems, because I would argue that this basic kind of structure of an algorithmic system, which extracts data from the world, vectorizes it, then feeds into a machine learning system, computes some kind of prediction that is then folded back onto the world. This is also, in my view, a giant chicane, right? It's a giant prop to a kind of divinatory performance, but one that is unsincere, because in a lot of cases, it is framed as not being a chicane at all, because data is this serum of truth, and so-called AI is, a source of unbiased knowledge and all the rest of it, which we are very used to hearing. So you can argue that, I would argue that this whole chicane that this data science loop kind of presents is an insincere one, and that this was all available to me thanks to Rami's kind of framings. And in more recent development of like so-called generative AI, I would argue that moving to these prompt-based and language-based interaction really heightened this, kind of unequal relationship to an amazing degree, because, it kind of frames the whole thing as an interaction with this entity that really is just a trained conversational agent that is not, again, a kind of sincere interaction or production of this divinatory performance. So because this is AIX design, I thought I would add, this is not substantiated at all, but there are definitely some examples of this that we could find in relation to kind of the design profession. Adobe is now moving into this field as a kind of big big player in the data analytics industry, and kind of offers, of course, generative image generation, but also just plain old like marketing analytics and all this stuff, which would be really interesting to dig into. How does Adobe, how is Adobe specific within these this field? And something that I've seen a lot, which is can really be framed as insincere chicanery, is this idea that AI is some kind of this super tool that artists and designers really need to adopt, otherwise they're gonna be like left behind, right? So it creates this really uneven relationship if we look at this through the lens of like an insincere chicanery, this kind of like position as an intermediary between creatives and these kinds of super tools that they're supposedly like now depending on for survival, whereas like there are obviously a lot of other factors into the fact that the position of designer or artist is an increasingly kind of precarious one, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with like adoption of whatever new kind of startup tool. So with this kind of introduction to the chicane done, I would move to showing like a couple of projects and then I'll be finished. How is time going?
You're good. Yeah. Okay. It's now, if you could like maybe five more minutes around, but please continue. We're fine with time.
Cool. So I'm going to show quickly a couple of projects. So this was in my PhD. It was basically revisiting the almanac publication. So you may have heard of the Farmer's Almanac as a kind of early prototype for algorithmic prediction. Right? It was providing a lot of weather predictions and stuff like this. Not so much in technical terms, but more as a kind of cultural space that I thought was interesting to investigate with new tools. So basically what I did was I produced predictions with tools of like machine learning, but catering to this kind of cultural space of the almanac, which was much more kind of pop culture-ish and mixed up with all sorts of rationalities that weren't necessarily, let's say, scientific. So unfortunately, the website at almanac.computer is currently like not operational because some data sources stopped functioning, and so I have to rewrite a bunch of it. But I do hope to bring it back. But it is documented in my thesis and other places if you're interested. So just to run through a couple of the widgets that I created for it. So this was called Cosmic Commodity Charts, and this was a machine learning model which is basically trained on the positions of the planets of the solar system in relation to the prices of commodities like corn, wheat, orange juice, things like this. And so by training this model, I was then able to extrapolate future prices based on the future positions of the planet, creating these charts that predict the evolution in the price. Crisis Proximity Index is an astrology that is based on the 2008 financial crisis. So it basically compares the positions of the planets and whether they're getting closer to what they were when the crisis started or further away. And obviously being closer is interpreted as a bad omen and being further away is better. And so it kind of does this sum of all the different planets to come up with like an index of crisis proximity. And finally, I did some electional astrology calendars, which electional astrology is basically determining the best time to do certain actions. So I basically encoded different criteria from astrology for dummies into Python program. And I was then able to compute calendars for the year for particular tasks like purchasing a computer or signing contracts and things like that, depending on your location and the different time. And so I won't go too much into it, but basically all these widgets are programmed also as Jupyter notebooks, which makes them these like explorable programs that kind of show their outputs. So there was some thought there linking back to the chicane about, completely subverting basically the tools of machine learning for stuff that, they weren't created for, but being quite sincere and open about it in the sense that, everything works and everything is there to be explored. And it's quite, open what the subterfuges are. I'm going to go quite quickly on this project, also because it's really unresolved. This is like some early research that I started doing into divination influencers on TikTok. This became super problematic and stuff, so I'm actually glad we're out of time, but I'm just gonna skip through it. We can continue later if you want, but yeah, I was thinking of using the alignment chart meme as a method. Didn't really work out. Ended up like collecting a bunch of data and doing alignments like this. And yeah, I would say about this. So this was a chicane of the divination, basically. But one of the outcomes of this project is the idea of like that this form can also be nested. So in this case, you have diviners, performing the chicane with their audience, and through this kind of TikTok video format, for example. And then you have the recommendation algorithm, which enters into this divinatory performance, sometimes explicitly, like the fact that my video showed up on your timeline is a sign that you need to watch this and that this has a particular relevance for you. And then as a third level, I'm coming in as a researcher, also kind of performing my own tricks and obviously being situated in the way that I approach these things. So it was interesting to kind of, do a kind of inception of the chicane in that project. But as I said, this is like very much construction sites. This idea, it's not arrived at anywhere. Okay, so I'll do my conclusion. I'll try to be quite quick. I guess where I want to leave this is like, if we think about like what kinds of chicanes are sincere and what should we be striving towards in the current kind of moment around so-called AI and the way that it's starting to disrupt certain areas quite severely. I would say that the kind of politics of divination that I would strive towards is a Luddite kind of chicanery. So Luddism is kind of coming back at the moment, not as a kind of anti-tech, but more as a position that basically says like whoever is affected should be allowed to control the technology, right? Without going into Luddism comes from like a labor perspective, which is quite important as well. But yeah, so I had to kind of reclaim or push back against these insincere chicanes. And so Dan McKillen, from his perspective, he's proposing like people's councils, of like governance. And again, this is very much the idea of, coming back to some kind of commoning. And I like that, the chicane is something that ideally in the sincere form you do together to produce this kind of engagements with the unknown. And divinatory knowledge is not something that comes from, someone with more knowledge or power. It's something that is like collectively done. And so that's a quite interesting idea to me, that this council form or the kind of commoning is a way forward in this case. However, I don't think we're likely to see a kind of people's council in charge of OpenAI anytime soon. So there is also some modes of, maybe harsher resistance that are emerging and that are really interesting to me as well. So for example, Nightshade is a way to poison data sets. I don't know if you've heard of this. the same group that did glaze as well. So this is like a way for artists to turn their images into poison points in the data sets, so that when the companies come to scrape their portfolios, they end up with like bad examples in the data set. And there's this idea of that if enough people do this, the effect is kind of stronger. So again, it's kind of this collective mode of action and collective kind of manifesting of a kind of counterattack. Okay, I won't go into it, but I have a project, a recent project that kind of touches into this, basically casting spells on billionaires, black magic, etc. No time. But the idea of a peer-to-peer formation, I think, is something that I've been quite interested in, both in terms of commons and all the things that I've mentioned, but also how do you make the infrastructure for this? And there are really exciting things happening at the moment, which actually enable this kind of peer-to-peer architecture. And so I will leave you with the last image, is this wonderful group of Japanese monks called Jusatsu Kito Sodan, Killing Curse Prayer Monk Group, which were operating in the 70s and roaming the countryside to cast curses on the bosses of polluting factories. There was some really bad kind of pollution scandals in the 70s, and these guys were like cursing the owners of the factory. So yeah, I'll leave it here. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to questions or anything that you may have. Thank you
so much, David. I think it's been so full of ideas and visual images, and sort of stimulating us in so many ways. So I'll just jump right into the questions so that we can warm up a bit. My first question is, I'd say, it's going back to the beginning. You're looking into ways of reclaiming algorithm and sort of subverting the way that they work, and taking the possible back from the subverting processes. But if I may ask you, what prompted you to start that investigation initially? Why divination studies and algorithm? Why make this connection?
So I guess the way that I got there was like a fairly not conventional, but like very much design-based PhD proposal about like modeling and the way that model like interfaces to models. So at the time I was like, when I pitched the PhD, it was like much more, how is this stuff made into designed objects, basically? How is machine learning made into interfaces and how that shapes our vision of it? So at the time it was like Siri, Cortana, things like this. And then gradually, at least for me, it was understanding that all this modeling and all this machine learning is actually diagrams, very diagrammatic. So the math is deeply like spatial. The vectorization that we talked about is like, creates like these multi-dimensional spaces, and then they've stretched and cut and stuff. And this was thanks to Adrian Mackenzie's book, Machine Learners, which where he conducts like this archaeology of machine learning in a like quite dense but really fascinating way that at least helped me like click with my kind of design brain that okay, this was diagrams and this was something that I could engage with. And then the shift to divination was very much like a result of this. So I was looking at things like technical analysis, which is basically like astrology for the stock market, like like literally measuring the angles on the charts to predict where it's going to go next. It's like a visual way of doing stock forecasting, and all these different things. And of course, astrology is also really diagrammatic. Like it's you split the sky into these different segments, and then things move, and it matters if they're going up or down, and all these different things. So yeah, I guess just having this focus on diagrams and prediction, I kind of had to get to divination. And yeah, I guess like Joshua Rami really helped me then to make the jump from the financial market stuff to divination studies, which then led me to people like Cornelius and that field. So and also thanks to Rami, like really this idea that like politically it's quite important to actually not dismiss divination or like to ask the right questions at the right stage of question this part, but not like actually whether astrology should exist or not is not that relevant, or is true or not is not that relevant.
Thank you so much. And actually picking up on that point about asking the right questions.
Yes.
It's something that you're showing in your research, and also something that we aim to show through esoteric AI, is exactly that that desire to predict the future is something that has roots in divination practices, and what we know now as data science and collecting data for prediction is something that's going all the way back, sort of coming from the sky, if you will. But when we were dealing with those ideas as we were developing the project of esoteric AI, one question that surfaced when we were hosting some sessions and has been sort of in my mind since is, isn't that dangerous? Because there's already so many harmful narratives that bring uncertainty around science and the use of data and prediction as a scientific thing in terms of, climate change and predictions in that regard, or vaccines. And like even this vocabulary of divination, something harmful, or can it be used for something harmful? And I wonder, what is your take on those type of concerns?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important question, and I think you're absolutely spot on. Like we're at a very fraught and dangerous time, and Isabel Stangers speaks about this. I think it's a book in French, but I can fish out the reference if that's of interest. But yeah, she basically says like mentions the kind of generalized crisis that we're currently in, of like basically the dominant kind of modern rationality that had like, the pretense to universality and rationality and the monopoly on like, legitimate science and all this. And this is obviously in a terrible state at the moment. Like this is, showing a kind of logical conclusion that is, climate collapse, biodiversity collapse, colonial regimes enacting absolutely horrendous actions with no repercussions, like you can name it. And so there is at once, I think, a really like a real urgency to this kind of reclaiming and reclaiming things like divination and other practices and other modes of indigenous rationalities and all these sorts of things. And at the same time, the current time is creates a vacuum, I think, for all sorts of actors to enter and to peddle their insincere chicane that are very, very harmful. You mentioned anti-vax. There is also like QAnon and all this rise of like the American kind of paranoid conspiracy mindset that is exploding and totally mainstreamed and all these things. So yeah, I think it's important to be aware of the danger of this time. And that's, I personally come from like, some of my background is in speculative design. And I think in the early 2010s, there was definitely a certain naivete that speculating was, a good thing to be doing. And I don't think that's so obvious, like I think it's important to be interested in speculation and in how speculation happens, how our future is created, who gets to create them and for what purposes and stuff like this. But speculation is not inherently a good practice. It's there are plenty of like mostly bad actors speculating. Actually, if you think of like the combination of whatever, like finance, right-wing politics, that's already quite a lot of bad speculation going on.
Thank you so much for answering that. I suppose we could take one question from the chat that I saw here. So question for later. Later came right now. So what isn't being talked about in the mainstream media when it comes to AI's rockabilly cults, or maybe derivatives of it, especially relating the choke points of both emergence as chaos, considering systems innovation thinking. Tech progress has especially been a religion, as we as a species need an object of worship. So I suppose that also brings us back to what you slightly mentioned, that the recommendation algorithm, AI as an oracle, and sort of that's beyond human force that we seem to worship in one way or another.
Yeah, and I think things like Moore's law, come to mind. These kinds of like I don't know, self-fulfilling, but also like stupidly simple, like diagrams of okay, these are the tracks around people. It's just gonna keep getting better and better and better and better, and that's just what it's gonna do. And then like I get it stopped doing that at some point. But then I'm also hesitant of like saying it stopped doing that. It's more like it was never that, but from the perspective of white European people like me, it was better, and then it stopped. But then that should help us reconsider the whole lineage. I guess the important thing to do here is not to say like, oh, it was so good back then, and then it stopped being good, because it's not true. But I don't know. So sorry, I'm looking at the question to not stray too much. Rocco's basilisk is this idea that if you're not nice to the AI now, the future AI is going to kill you or torture you in eternity. I mean, I think this is like one of these dark mythologies that are like similar to like the deep time, kind of effective altruism. Like there's a lot of I would say it ends up having quite nefarious effects, because it's these really highly speculative stories that are used to then obfuscate stuff happening now. And there is nothing, kind of sci-fi-ish about the systems and the kinds of infrastructure behind so-called AI right now. But then if you bring in things like the basilisk narrative, where like some sentient Skynet is coming to deal with the bad feelings that you gave it, it kind of acts as a smokescreen, I guess, to the very real harms that are being enacted right now, for example, on various labor markets or things like that. So I don't know if that answers the questions, but
We are slightly running out of time.
yeah.
Ellie, maybe we could take very last questions very, very quickly. So Damien asks, are there forms of positive chicory that we could talk about? And I think that also links to something else that I wanted to ask you at the end, because you're bringing together your research practice and your practice as a designer. So what would you advise as researchers, as designers, people who work with AI, not to fall in that trap, to sort of,
So I'll take the positive. Yeah, I do think there's positive chicanery, and there are like, and I think, to me, I get the line between sincere and insincere is also quite interesting. The distinction that Rami kind of gives, because you kind of escape the value judgment of like, is this plus or minus, and it's more like, are you fully like acknowledging your lack of knowledge of the future together and trying to help each other, through it. And so one example that comes to mind a lot is Cassie Thornton's hologram. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's basically like a peer-to-peer care system where like it's a formation where I think it's 3 people that care about a fourth, and kind of provide different levels of care on a kind of regular basis, and then each of the 3 can then in turn be cared for by another formation, and it kind of grows like this. And it kind of came out during the pandemic, but she had been working on it before, and then it's now kind of taken a life of its own, and this is big network and stuff. So I think it's kind of ritualized care, and to me that kind of falls under the chicanery, or could easily fall under the chicanery umbrella. And then that's, in my view, like sincere and, to answer your question, positive. So that's one example. Natalia, you were asking advice. So yes, I see a lot of kind of shoulder shrugging, like, oh, well, I guess AI is here, and, we better start teaching it to our students, and, we're not going to stop it, and blah, blah, blah. And I would really encourage people to not give in to that, like to just, the emperor has no clothes, and it's important to keep saying it because it's not stupid to say it, because it's true. He's naked, and we shouldn't be kind of fooled by it. And it's a bit like, some of the crypto or NFT hype waves that we saw. It's like, it's not going to, like, the existence of the thing relies on you not saying that it doesn't exist in the way that it's presented. So yeah, just remember that, I guess.
We do have
Yes.
a bit of time.
Okay, so I'm happy to take more questions. Link to my thesis. Yeah, you're not meant to read these things, so.
Yeah, but the question behind the thesis thing is, I want to know if, sorry, I'm jumping the line.
Okay.
I know if any of your predictions from your thesis ever came true from your widget.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, you can check. But then the one that would be easier to check is in the appendix. I think there are some of the calendars. That we produce at the VNA. When to schedule a meeting. Yeah, it's going to be hard to tell if like the meeting went well in 2016. There was a wedding that was planned according to the calendars. So actually, if I can't find that person now, but yeah, they were going to get married on. They both printed their calendars and then tried to like find the overlap of the best date.
All right, we still have a bit of a time. Nadia, do you want to jump in with your question quickly, or would you like me to?
No, I can jump in. Hi, David. This
Hi.
is great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I had a question. It's not a very open question. It's like a weird brain, like whatever. Of course, I
Right.
don't know if you've ever thought about this, or what do you thought about? So there's it's completely see the overlaps, of course, between like astrology, machine learning, or like ways of scrying and how we relate to those, and diagramming specifically, or these visual representations as way of understanding, representations of these systems. Do you think there's anything we can learn from the way we draw bird charts, or the way we read tarot, or more practically apply that to explainable AI, or how we visualize latent space, or as a, because when we talk about explainable AI, I don't know, I feel this is it's not an area that's looked into, but I feel like there could be something there. Is that something you've ever thought about or heard about, or just curious?
So no, I don't have like direct examples or anything to like in terms of explainable AI, but I think it's more the process of like you know. So one aspect that I do have is like the line between the stars, like so the way that all these maths come from looking at the stars originally, like smoothing orbit curves and stuff like this. It's quite like, if you said that the line, that the connection was so direct, you would probably be like, it's almost too much. It's also a lot to claim a direct relationship because it's very far away, but it does come from that lineage. But what strikes me is more like how similar the idea and simplistic the idea of like, putting all the data into a space and then that somehow distance is going to tell you something. The way that distance is made meaningful in machine learning is so kind of, eerily similar to a thing like, because your star icon is a little part of the sky, then it means you're horny, or whatever. So, I guess that when you know this and when you listen to people speak about so-called AI, it's kind of amazing, really, because you wouldn't say that about, or like you wouldn't make claims about, even astrologers don't make such claims, the good ones. So I don't know where this answer is going, but yeah.
No, this is we live in this weird space, right? And I think there's a lot, unexpectedly, maybe there's a lot that data scientists and machine learning engineers like learn from like other scrying practitioners and how they sort of present the insight in a way, that's kind of, here's the thinking rather than this is an objective observation. But
at the same time, I wouldn't hold my breath towards like until machine learning engineers accept that
oh no, I'm not
machine learning is on the same level.
Not forever. Yes.
Wait till that moment. So
no, but it's I just like it as an idea of like what else could be, and like how differently that would look, even if not everyone necessarily subscribes to that. Nat, do you want to wrap or have any final question?
I think that I would have so many more questions to ask, but we are
right.
So I cannot occupy David anymore. But I mean, I think we are all left with incredible amount of ideas to work with. And a lot's going on in our minds. So from my side, David, thank you so much for being here and for joining us, for sharing your research, for sharing your time with us to answer.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure and real insightful conversation. I'll definitely keep an eye on the rest of the series.
Thank you so much. And speaking of the rest of the series, Nadia, do you want to add a bit about AX design?
Nothing. We're AX design. Thank you for being here. There's a link in the chat if you want to hang out more and have some more weird brain music. David, thank you so much for joining and sharing your thoughts, and Nat for hosting. So I had to jump because we have another info session now for like artist commission. So I'm gonna pop over there as well. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Have a beautiful evening, and whatever you do,